He lived in Potsdam, worked at the British Embassy in Berlin, and passed information to the Russians. But despite all that it sounds, David Smith wasn't operating at the height of Cold War hostilities, but before and during the pandemic, utilising his access to the inner workings of the British state for hostile means. The embassy security guard is a far cry from the mysterious and thrilling figures from espionage folklore, but a 58-year-old who claims he was lonely, depressed and drinking too much when he began leaking secrets in an attempt, he said, to reveal flaws in security and cause embarrassment. But today a judge sentenced him to 13 years in prison, ruling that Mr. Smith was motivated by an antipathy towards the UK and the West, describing him as methodical, working at stealth by night to copy sensitive documents, acts that not just damaged the interests of the UK, but put embassy staff at risk and gave the impression he was more sympathetic to Russia and President Putin.
We know that he collected sensitive information, details of embassy staff, military personnel's details, videos of the layout of the embassy and imagery of certain files, for example.
Mr. Smith was caught in a sting operation by British intelligence services and German police, put in place after a letter he'd sent to Russia's military attaché to Berlin was intercepted. This footage shows him in the security kiosk at the British Embassy, filming CCTV of an undercover operative posing as a Russian defector called Dmitry. The secret camera also catches him muttering to himself about Dmitry and whether his Russian contacts will know him.
If it was an embassy, they must recognise him. It's probably not any deal with an embassy, but at least it's done it.
Had Dmitry been a genuine visitor to the British Embassy, and therefore a Russian genuinely trying to pass secrets to the British, it is impossible to know what would have been the consequences for him of having his treachery to Russia exposed in this way by you.
The court heard how Mr. Smith had taken photos of documents clearly marked classified, including one to the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
You took care to store some documents in a way which made it less likely that they would be found by someone who casually examined them. For example, you put some of the photographed documents containing personal details of embassy staff into a file, the name of which suggested that it contained nothing but holiday photographs.
Mr. Smith was eventually arrested after arranging a meeting with another undercover agent purporting to be a Russian spy. This week he said he was disgusted with himself and ashamed of what he'd done. But as the judge concluded today, precisely what he'd done before being caught and the damage it has caused may never be known.
I'm joined now by Dr. Dan Lomas, who's an expert on security and intelligence from Brunel University in London. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Lomas. I mean, this seems like a tale straight out of the Cold War era. Are you surprised that something like this would happen in this day and age?
No, it underlines again the potency of the threat posed by Russia's intelligence services and the fact that Russian intelligence officers are looking for walk-ins, as in this case. It also underlines the fact that, you know, when we think about modern day tech and we talk about the world of open source intelligence, often the world of espionage, spies is still something that's, you know, long been with us.
But I mean, in terms of thinking about context and the history of spying for Russia, this isn't on the same scale of sort of Kim Philby, is it?
No, I think when we talk about the Kim Philbys, the George Blakes of this world, we're talking about intelligence officers on the inside who are providing high-level, highly sensitive information that can compromise intelligence operations overseas. In this case, I think, you know, we can often focus on the information itself and suggest that it's not that serious in terms of some of the information that's provided. But my argument would be that this minor information, I think that you're building up a broader picture of what it's like to work at the British Embassy in Berlin. The names and identities of some of the diplomatic staff who are working at the embassy were offered to Russia's intelligence services, and some of the information that's being provided, particularly photo ID, the roles of individuals working in the embassy, and also even embassy gossip about individuals working there can potentially provide Russian intelligence with information that can be used to approach them for future intelligence activities.
I'm quite intrigued the fact that he was caught partly because his letters to the Russian embassy were opened, presumably by intelligence working for the German postal service. That's really curious. Is that something we would expect to happen as a matter of course, just to look out for who's writing to the Russian embassy?
Well, potentially. I mean, you're looking at contacts of who's working in the embassy and overseas. Yeah, so this might happen in day-to-day activities. I think, like in all walks of life, we can get people who are good spies who kind of hide what they're doing, and people who are, as in this case, bad spies that are adopting poor tradecraft and when trying to contact the Russian embassy. And indeed, there have been cases previously. Former MI5 officer Michael Bettany was making contact in the 1980s with the Soviet embassy in London and trying to provide information through passing letters. So yeah, it's within the realms of that we can think about.
I mean, this story seems a little bit old-fashioned. Isn't spying now about cracking into people's phones and satellites and potentially spy balloons?
Well, and we've often, we've seen a lot about spy balloons in the news. We've talked a lot about the world of open source and publicly available information that we can, anyone can potentially Google. And we often obsess about the high level, the high tech forms of spying out there. Espionage or spying is, as the term goes, the second oldest profession out there. And I think that it can give us angles, it can give us opportunities into sources of information that other sources can't get. And as I often tell my students, there's no best int out there when we're thinking about the individual types of intelligence collection sources. Each of these sources, whether it's a high-tech, newfangled gadget, all the way through to simple agent running, has pros and cons. Okay. And in this case, having someone on the inside providing information on what it's like to work in the embassy, which rooms are secure, is really, really important, and could only have been provided to Russian intelligence by an insider, by an insider source.
Very quickly, who is spying on the UK? I mean, we would expect Russia to, certainly potentially China. Would we expect the US to also be spying on the UK? I mean, who is actually spying on us?
Well, there are kind of spying on allies is often seen as a bit of a no-no, but it does in reality happen. In terms of the US-UK relationship, the special relationship between us, then we can say no. The UK and US are part of the wider Five Eyes signals intelligence community network, and there are close ties between US and other transatlantic intelligence agencies. In terms of other European allies, then we cannot rule that strictly out. There are strictly no friends in the world of intelligence. But in terms of other hostile states that are targeting the UK, the heads of both MI5, SIS, MI6, and GCHQ have talked openly about the threat posed by China, Russia, we've mentioned that, Iran, and also North Korea.
Okay, Dr. Dan Lomas, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us.